Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Roslinda, so for my group, we will be presenting on the topic of Western ideology, relativism. Relativism basically is the belief that truth and falsity, right and wrong, standards of reasoning and justification methods are the product of different conventions and evaluation frameworks, and the authority is relative to the perspective of an observer or the context in which they are assessed. Interest in relativism ideology goes back to ancient Greece. A number of philosophical considerations, as well as socio-historical developments, explain the enduring interest and the more recent popularity of relativism. The English term relativism came into usage only in the 19th century. John Grote was the first to employ it in Exploratio Philosophica 1865. To note that Sophists are considered the founding fathers of relativism in Western philosophy. They were teachers in ancient Greece back then. Elements of relativism emerged among the Sophists in the 5th century before Christ. Notably, Protagoras of Abdera is considered the first overt champion of relativism with his dictum of "Man is the measure of all things, both what it is and what isn't." Besides, Plato is the one who first battle-cry against Protagoras' dictum. He ascribes a social or ethical dimension to Protagorean relativism, which seemed to go beyond individualistic subjectivism. Paritropy, or turning around by Plato, is the first of the many attempts to show that relativism is self-refuting. Furthermore, the popularity of the very idea of relativism in 20th century owes something to Einstein's special theory of relativity in 1905, which was to be used both as model as well as a vindication for various relativistic claims. Gilbert Harman is among the philosophers to use Einsteinian relativity as a model for philosophical versions of relativism. Somehow, there is a recent version of relativism. This recent version, sufficiently distinct from the relativism itself, so far considered that it is deserving of attention in its own right, that are called New Relativism. It is actually a variety of relativism that has arisen out of work in the philosophy of language in the analytic tradition. So that's all from me. I will pass the station to the next speaker to further discuss the topic. Over to you, Fathia.
Thank you, Roslinda. I am Fathiah, your next presenter. Moving on to the next slide, the characteristic and principles of relativism. Just like any other ideology, relativism has its own distinctive characteristic and principles that differentiate it from others. The characteristic of relativism can be seen in three widely discussed forms, which are epistemic or factual, ethics or moral, and cultural relativism along with the principles. Firstly, the characteristic of epistemic or factual relativism. In this ideology, knowledge is only true in relation to a certain context, society, culture, or individual. There are no absolute facts about norms of belief, justification, or reasoning. Only relative facts exist. There is no such thing as absolute truth. The truth is always relative to some frame of reference, such as in the context of language and culture. Next, the characteristic of ethics or moral relativism. For relativists, there are no universal moral standards or rules to guide a person's conduct. What is considered as morally right varies from each society and individual. Individuals' background, beliefs, environment, experience play major factors in their behaviors or perception on certain matters. Lastly, the characteristic of cultural relativism, which has become popular in the 20th century, especially with the advent of social anthropology. Note that there are no universal standards that can be used to evaluate all social and cultural groupings. All religions are equally meaningful to their adherents. There is no superior religion. Religious belief and practices must be examined in the context of a person's own culture and history. Although there are many different kinds of relativism and its characteristics, they all share the same principles. There are no absolute reference for human beliefs, human behaviors, and ethics. In simpler words, humans understand and evaluate beliefs and behaviors only in terms of their historical or cultural context. There is no absolute truth. Truth are relative. Therefore, there is an equal validity to all truth claims. This ideology also rejects that any point of view is superior to all others. That's all from me, passing the floor to Fatini.
Thank you, Fathiah, for the input. I am Fatini, and now we will see what are the impacts of relativism on people, examples of ideologies and activities in different parts of the world. First of all, the impact of relativism are precisely cultural relativism. One is unable to put an end to a certain practice from happening, whether they live in the society or outsiders. It also means that they are unable to question the practice, as it is protected by its culture and tied to the belief. For instance, the practice of female genital cutting, or in short, FGC. In Africa, the practice is a norm, and by allowing this procedure to happen, females are considered women and then are able to be married. FGC is practiced mainly because of culture, religion, and tradition. Outside cultures, such as the United States, look down upon FGC but have no right to stop it. Moreover, relativism can lead to negative judgments of the behaviors of groups or societies. This can also be called ethnocentrism. For example, one may find it is weird and gross to eat fried crickets. However, in Mexico, fried crickets are famous Oaxaca regional cuisine as they are full of protein and claim to be healthy. Despite the many negative impacts of relativism on people that I shared previously, it also unites people in the same society or of different backgrounds together. For instance, the imposition of awareness against black people discrimination. In America, black people are considered bad and dirty. Also, any aggressive act out of self-protection is considered violence. Only after the case of George Floyd had gotten worldwide attention, the slogan Black Lives Matter started to trend again after many years. So that's all from me. I will pass it to the next presenter.
Thank you, Fatini, for the beneficial input. Now moving on to the strength, the shortcoming, and the evidence related with the Islamic worldview.
For the first strength is relativists have no absolute God. They make their own decisions according to their desires. The shortcoming is relativism affects person's behavior and decisions are made by the majority of its followers of his or her culture that believes them to be so. From the Islamic worldview, the core concept which permeates all aspects of life is tawhid, or the unity of God. To be a Muslim is to believe in the oneness of God. Say, He is Allah, the One, the eternally besought of all. He begets not nor was begotten, and there is none comparable unto Him. Quran, Surah 112, verse 1-4. Tawhid is the only worldview that gives meaning to people's mutual commitment and obligation, as well as the only worldview that prevents man from worship of nothingness. Second strength, relativists have greater understanding of other cultures in which there is less assimilation into their ways of living. Its shortcoming, it doesn't allow any progress nor requirement to better society, as its followers lack the concept of guiding right and wrong. From the Islamic worldview, Islam is a primarily religion of empowerment and growth. Empowerment in the Islamic perspective should be a never-ending process, reflecting Islam's paradigm as a religion of change and mobility and offer an alternative to solving society's social, economic, and environmental challenges. As for the third strength, relativists perceive their surroundings simple and in line with how the world works. Its shortcoming, it lacks in common morality, especially when it comes to moral discrepancies between societies, and variations in moral frameworks are rarely explained. From the Islamic worldview, the Quran states, Allah has revealed to human the consciousness and the connection of good and evil. Surah Shams, verse 8. Our understanding of vice and virtue should not be founded solely on intellect, desire, intuition, or experience, because these components are always changing, adapting, and evolving in response to external surroundings. The knowledge of the divine revelation establishes a permanent and universal code of moral behavior that applies to all eras and circumstances.
Thank you, Zahidah. Assalamualaikum. My name is Noor Zahwa. Now I'm going to summarize our topic, which is relativism. So basically, the concept of this theory is morality is relative to the norms of one's culture, which means whether an action is right or wrong depends on the moral norms of the society in which it is practiced. In terms terms of the historical development, this theory was first spread by the ancient Greece. The elements of this theory emerged among the Sophists in the 5th century before Christ. The term relativism only started in the 19th century. However, Protagoras, who was considered as an overt champion of relativism, had a dictum on which it was opposed by Plato, as it seems to be self-refuting. This theory then became popular because of the Einstein theory used by Gilbert Hermann. Next, the impacts of relativism on its people. Firstly, some of the practices cannot be prevented as it is protected by its culture. Second, having bad judgments of societies or groups' behavior. And the last one, it unites people whether in the same or different backgrounds. Moving on to the characteristics of relativism, there are 3 types of characteristics, which are epistemic or factual relativism, ethics or moral relativism, and lastly, cultural relativism. Epistemic or factual relativism shows that there is no absolute truth or fact, which means something is only true if it's relative to some frame of reference, such as culture. Next, ethics or moral relativism shows that there is no universal moral standards. This is because one's behaviors or perceptions on certain matters are influenced by the individual's background, beliefs, environment, and also experience. Lastly, cultural relativism also shows that there is no universal standards in evaluating social or cultural groupings. Religions and also practices must be evaluated in terms of one's own culture and history. Lastly, the strengths and the shortcomings of relativism. Firstly, there is no absolute God, which means everyone can make their own decisions. However, this could affect one's behavior, and the decisions are determined by the majority beliefs. Next, greater understanding of other cultures and less assimilation. However, there will be no progress and requirement to better the society, as its followers lack of concept of guiding right and wrong. Lastly, this theory is simple and in line with how the world works. However, there would be moral deviations between societies and also variations in moral framework.
In the world of relativism, where no moral absolutes exist, God is rejected, and all his laws, whatever he says, man's folly persists. Relativism is a Western ideology, a belief where authority is relative to the perspective of an observer or the context in which they are assessed. The theology speaks about history and faith, its rationality and intellectual debate, meant to participate without any regret with a relationship between faith and intellect. Sophists are the developer, whereas Protagoras is the first over champion with his dictum of man is the measure of all things, both what it is and what isn't. Plato is indeed the opponent of Greek philosophical tradition. The influence in the medieval Latin formation shared some dialogue along with revelation. The interest and popularity grows, along with the escalation number of philosophical considerations as well as socio-historical developments.
To be a relativist is to have no superiority, almost to no authority, relativity as its priority. Opinions may differ between entity, but don't ever question its validity. Facts are reckoned within society, and each truth is accepted absolutely. To be a relativist is to possess morality unfixed, where the righteous are mixed. No rules to obey, no standards to portray. Right and wrong are just options. One's belief resonates with perceptions. One's ground is no exception. To be a relativist is to never let one's stand shift. Carry with pride the ancestors' gift, along with the ancient culture that long exists. No religion is uplift. Objectivity shall never be dismissed. Let alone allow others to untwist. What one ought to be true shall not rift. To be a relativist, universal reference is irrelevant. Absolute truth is impertinent. One's claims remain evident. One's standpoint stay definite.
One may see with a pair of clear eyes or heart that beats in someone else's shoes, which mind always wonders, what is the truth, what is wrong? Yet one may see with eyes that blind or heart that blacken in his own world of judgment, which mind never sway and says, what is true indeed. One may talk, whispering, judging and discerning under the influence of individualism, culture, religion and tradition, to not be led astray from the path, devoted, loyal and a believer. He may welcome, he may accept, he may disregard, he may disapprove. People unites, and as fragile as human is, people may be segregated. Relativism births people that vary. That is one of many kinds of ideologies.
In this world today of relativism where no moral absolutes exist, God is rejected and all his laws, whatever he says, men wholly persist. In all of this society breaks down, youngsters have nobody to look up to, having no guide to be morally true, lost in his darkness, having no clue. Despite all of this stupidity abounding, God's voice will not be drowned out. His word still speaks with power, divine authority casting no doubt. God says where a wrong do exist, the maker of all things knows best. Sinfulness is man's greatest danger, but the messenger came providing salvation's net. God declares his words as eternal, giving man an anchor for to hold, keeping him sure and certain always till judgment day when all will unfold.
That's what relativism is basically, where truth or falsity depends on the norms of the society. Even if it's losing dignity or diminishing social quality, they don't care really, because that's what has been consented by the majority.
The A to Z of isms. Relativism. Moral relativism is the view that what's right in one culture may be wrong in another, and that there's no way of judging between the two. It's all relative. There's no absolute truth of the matter. Different strokes for different folks, and that's okay. Imagine a Martian landing on Earth. She would see that people behave differently in different places. They've got different moral rules, different social customs. What's right in one location is wrong in another. She might well conclude that there's no such thing as the right way to live or the right thing to do for everyone at all times. It's all a matter of cultural norms. So, in parts of Spain, bullfighting is seen as a spectacle, whereas in many other countries, it's considered outrageous cruelty. Try setting up a bull ring in present-day London, for instance. If the visiting Martian could get an overview of the history of the world, she'd see that in ancient Rome it was fine to have gladiatorial combat to the death and to own slaves, but that both practices would be widely frowned upon in present-day Rome, or Amsterdam, or elsewhere. Attending fights to the death and keeping slaves was acceptable for the Romans, but would be wrong in today's Europe. This sort of relativism has been popular with some anthropologists who've attempted to appreciate other cultures from within, understanding sets of interwoven practices as responses to particular circumstances and traditions. They recognise that morality is different in different cultures, and they often argue that it's ethnocentric to impose your own set of values elsewhere, as if you know best. Such non-judgmental relativism might seem attractive, but think about Nazi Germany. There, it became socially acceptable and even required to treat Jews, homosexuals and gypsies as less than human. This became right there, both legally and morally. A relativist would simply have to bite the bullet and say that that was indeed right for Nazi Germany. That's what morality meant there, and that a morality which treats everybody with equal respect is no better or worse than the Nazi way of doing things, just different. Unless you want to embrace that sort of repugnant conclusion, it's probably best to steer clear of moral relativism. Some people go further and say that everything is relative, even truth, that what is true at one time in one place isn't true for everyone everywhere, or that there's no such thing as objective truth, just the truth according to me. We see hints of this in politics today. There is a big problem with this sort of relativism, though. The theory of relativism itself would have to, on its own account, be relative. So the theory that truth is relative couldn't be absolutely true.